Whilst Leslie looks at your settlement plans and assesses them, I just wanted to speak to some of my colleagues about their thoughts on fires in informal settlements. So Richard, can I start with you? We've just been through a spatial urban planning exercise and we're looking at some of the spatial metrics and their indication of fire risk. Obviously, spatial layout of a settlement is really important, but from the work that you've conducted on Iris Fire and other informal settlement focused research, what are we missing? What's the fire science and engineering that we are missing to understand the fire hazard in informal settlements?
The physical nature of informal settlements makes them highly susceptible to fire. Firstly, you have the density of the settlements where a lot of dwellings packed upon one another. So when one ignites, the fire can quickly move to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And there's a lot of fuel available, being the contents of the homes, and the homes themselves then all become fuel as a fire moves through. And then the dwellings themselves are very susceptible to fire for a number of reasons. As mentioned, the materials used are often easily ignitable. There may be plastics, there may be cardboards, there may be newspaper draft stoppers, maybe timber, maybe a variety of synthetic and organic products, but quickly ignite, and then once ignited, then spreads through the rest of the home. And then also people build the best that they can with the tools they have available, and sometimes they do an excellent job. But still, you find a lot of gaps between panels, gaps between walls and roofs, and all those openings make it easy for fire to penetrate, especially if your neighbor is a meter away, and then there's big flames coming out of his door or window, etc. Finding the holes on the side of your dwelling, igniting then, let's say, your curtains, or even if you've just left your window open, then the fire might come through your open window or open door, ignite, and then your dwelling becomes part of the fire, and then it spreads to the next, to the next. And then also things such as stored materials. You may have timber, plastics, rubber, tires, all sorts of things stored next to or on top of dwellings, and these form fire bridges. So as one dwelling burns, it ignites something stored between, so what you thought maybe would have been a safe divide between dwellings now is quickly crossed because of the ignitable items between. So all these things make it very difficult to intervene and very difficult to improve informal settlement fire safety because of a myriad of problems, and requires an understanding of all of those to try to look at which interventions can reduce the risk or increase the risk of fires occurring and then spreading through a settlement.
Sarah Jane, now that we've heard Richard's thoughts on the physical nature of the fire hazard, what can we learn about the communities and their response to the fire hazard? So from your work and Kanye's work in the communities around Cape Town, how did they see and interact with the fire hazard? What problems did they see?
Thanks, David. Kenya and I have been speaking with residents of 8 different informal settlements across Cape Town over the last 2 years. It's important to remember when we're talking about informal settlements that there's a lot of diversity both between informal settlements and within each settlement. And the building of homes and the structure of everyday life is shaped by this diversity. Much depends on people's access to resources, their relationship with neighbours and local leaders, and their relationship with the state. All of these can vary, but despite this diversity, some patterns do emerge.
That's right. Often what we find is that people are in positions where they have to make difficult trade-offs due to the tough situation in which they are living. It is not that people don't know about fire risk, nor that they don't care about fire safety. Many have been directly affected by fires in the past and know firsthand the loss and trauma that they bring. Fire risks often emerge because of the context in which people are living. As Richard suggested, many residents have to make difficult trade-offs between multiple different goods, such as fire safety, access to energy, and access to living space. We'll give 2 quick examples.
First, let's talk about access to energy for heating, lighting and cooking. Open flame devices like paraffin stoves heighten the risk of fire. Reliable access to affordable electricity is key for reducing fire risk within informal settlements. But some settlements lack access to formal electricity, and that means that residents either have to make their own informal electricity connections, rent connections from nearby housing, or rely on open flame technologies. And even where formal connections exist, electricity rates can prove unaffordable, and if that's the case, then people will continue to mix the energy sources that they use even after formal electricity connections are provided.
Secondly, let's talk about access to space. Where residents can build within an informal settlement is often controlled by local leaders as well as neighbors. In many cases, communities have made the effort to create and maintain passages between people's homes, but these come under pressure over time. The reason for this pressure on space is simple. If affordable access to formal housing is not possible, then people will need to expand what they have as their families grow. New residents will also move into the area looking for jobs. All this means is that settlements often densify over time. And as Richard points out, dense settlements increase the risk of fire spread.
Absolutely. And one answer that many NGOs have advocated for recently is reblocking. That's the changing of the layout of the settlement to make it more accessible to services and to create fire breaks. Reblocking can be useful, but over time it's subject to the same kinds of pressures as the need for space expands. And this is why the solution to fire risk within informal settlements is ultimately affordable, accessible, decent housing for all. Anything short of this is a compromise that will likely prove unsustainable over time.
Finally, Johannes, Sarah Jane and Richard have spoken about the fire hazard in the context of Cape Town. How does this compare to Nairobi and the work of the Tomorrow Cities project that's happening there at the moment?
As you said, my name is Johannes Atela. I'm the lead for the Nairobi Risk Hub, which is part of the wider Tomorrow Cities Hub, focused on generating transdisciplinary evidence that could inform disaster reduction in tomorrow cities. So we're working in 4 cities, Nairobi being one of them. The other cities are Kathmandu, Istanbul, and Quito. So within Nairobi, if you reflect a bit on the fire issues vis-a-vis the Cape Town experience, which is really very useful, is that fires in Nairobi are largely uncertain, the way they occur and the way they emerge are largely accidental. And when I say accidental, is the fact that they kind of emerge through different accidents that occur, maybe failure in electricity, failure in some lighting connections and all that. And these fires happen in a wide range of spaces. Of course, the informal, the settlements where people live, one of the spaces where they happen, but they also happen in industrial areas and also within the city centers, even the high-end areas. But even as these fires happen all over the city, the impacts of these fires are actually more severe for people living in the informal settlements, where poverty is a bit of a challenge, and the ability of the people or the informal settlers to respond to the incidences of fire or to respond to the impacts is relatively low due to poverty and, of course, due to weak social networks. So that is the reason why we are very keen to look at fires within the informal settlements, because then while other areas you'll find that there are insurance schemes, there's really relatively very strong safety nets. For this informal settlement, the safety nets are really very, very weak and coupled with poverty and governance issues. So that leads me to the element around thinking about what could be missing in the context of the engineering solutions, to approach this. Number one is the element of understanding the holistic ecosystems of fire, because when fire happens in particular settings or particular buildings, there is a whole ecosystem to that needs to be understood if you have to deal with it. There's issues to do with governance, there's issues to do with relations, there's issues to do with land use planning that basically exacerbate that. So there's need to be able to have that holistic understanding when we are designing engineering solutions to this particular problem. And secondly, there is real need for integrated socio-technical feasibility understanding, because I think engineering solutions are good, but on their own might not necessarily be effective in sorting out the fire risks that these communities are facing. There are a lot of other underlying social factors that need to be understood and be well integrated. The factors such as poverty, factors such as legitimacy, factors such as representation, policy, perspectives, and all that basically, and culture as well, which basically are underlying and might impede any even good engineering solutions from resolving the problems much more effectively. So the socio-technical feasibility of the solutions, the engineering solutions that we've proposed, are very critical, and that calls for a multidisciplinary or a transdisciplinary approach to the research that we do and the way we inform the policy, something that the Tomorrow Cities and the Nairobi Risk Hub in particular is very keen to address.
Lastly, to all the panelists, quickly, what next? How do we convert this knowledge into practical action for both communities and to the cities?
In terms of practical applications, one of the most important things to realize is there's no quick fix. And then moving forward, we require a very holistic solution to the problem. We require understanding fire behavior, fire spread, human response, what people are willing to work with, what they're not willing to work with, and also looking at how do we piggyback off what's happening, because fire safety is one of many problems people experience. So whenever something is done to uplift homes, to improve them thermally, to improve crime, all of those needs fire in the background, and then we can move forward to have a practical and relevant influence on communities.
While modeling and having a particular simulations are really useful, but really bringing the entire ecosystem of the processes is very critical. What are the governance aspects that inform the management of fire and the spread of, the management of fire, and of course, the resilience support for these communities? What are some of the existing community perspectives, underlying knowledge systems that could be leveraged or could be mobilized to be able to help in informing this particular process in a more holistic way. But lastly, I think it is critical to really, which is again connected to the point I've just mentioned, to take on a multi-hazard approach when undertaking or when dealing with fires, because fires don't occur in isolation. There are a number of other cascading impacts that, as I've mentioned, fires bring in Nairobi and especially in the informal settlements. Understanding all these cascading hazards or impacts that could be created through fire or could contribute to the fire risk is very important in the context of trying to break the accumulation of risk cycles.
I think that the key message coming out of our finding is the importance of community-driven approaches. Communities need to be involved in the design of fire safety devices, in the design of reblocking schemes, and in the decisions over human settlement strategies at a local, provincial, as well as national level.
Yeah, that's right. And we need to remember that communities are diverse. Residents within a single informal settlement can have really varied needs, values, and hopes. And that means any intervention is potentially contentious. It's crucial that communities are given the space and the resources they need to build consensus on contentious topics.
And often this means that interventions in the wake of an emergency are a bad idea. Communities are dispersed and traumatized. They have a range of immediate and pressing needs.
Yes, interventions need to be proactive, not reactive. Inclusive, democratic decision-making is key to long-term success. And that kind of decision-making just can't be rushed.